In the year when car number plates were introduced to the UK and the Entente Cordiale was signed between the UK and France, in a quiet little shop in Whitechapel in London, Miss Emily Matilda Farmer ran her newsagents and tobacconist's business. At 63, she looked younger than her years. Neatly dressed at all times, she wore gold pince-nez, 3 expensive gold rings on a finger, 2 bracelets, and a gold watch chain round her neck. She lived in the flat above the shop, but never allowed anyone into it except for family members. She was viewed as being rather eccentric, and it was rumoured she had money hidden in the flat. She had a routine that those who used the shop knew well. Between 5:45 a.m. and 6 a.m, she would meet the boy who delivered the newspapers, then would spend time making sure they were neatly folded for her customers. At the back of the shop was a room where she would prepare and eat her breakfast before returning to the shop front around 6:30, when the errand boy, 11-year-old Henry Wiggins, would arrive and take down the shutters. He would then go off and deliver papers. On the morning of Wednesday 12th October 1904, the day began as usual for the delivery boy, and for Wiggins. However, Miss Farmer wasn't about, so Wiggins served customers until around 7:30. It was then he noticed Miss Farmer's false teeth on the floor, along with a soda water bottle and an empty tumbler. It was strange, as he knew she wouldn't be seen without them. He told another boy about his concerns, and he, in turn, alerted Miss Baker, the shopkeeper next door. She raised the alarm with the police. The police officer saw the false teeth, then a boot near the counter in the shop. Heading upstairs into the flat, he found a piece of her broken pince-nez. Instinct told him something terrible had happened to the woman. As he entered the front room, his eyes were immediately drawn to the body of Miss Farmer, lying at the foot of her bed. Her hands had been tied behind her back, and she'd been gagged with a towel that had been forced into her mouth. It had been tied in place with a piece of cloth. Miss Baker had followed the officer in, and after he removed the gag and untied her hands, the pair laid her on the bed, unfastening her dress and corset. The constable, then Miss Baker, believed they felt a faint heartbeat and was sure she was still alive. Dr. Charles Graham Grant, a surgeon who lived opposite the shop, was quickly summoned, but unfortunately Miss Farmer's heart gave up and she died before he arrived. The doctor pronounced her dead. Further investigations got underway, and it was deemed there had been more than one perpetrator involved in tying her hands behind her back. She died due to the gag suffocating her, but there were no signs of a struggle. Superintendent James Mulvaney, Detective Inspector T. Divil, Subdivisional Inspector A. Holland, and Detective Sergeant Wensley soon arrived at the property. They agreed she hadn't struggled, but also noted the 3 rings were missing from her finger, as were the 2 bracelets and the gold watch chain. A small tin in which she kept her takings was also missing. The room itself had been ransacked, with drawers tipped out. As soon as the murder hit the newspapers, police knew they would have their hands full with false confessions. One of the first came from 31-year-old James Fitzpatrick, who walked into Worthing Police Station and confessed to Sergeant Dean. However, it didn't take long to discover that the billiard maker of no fixed abode was lying. He'd been admitted to Brighton Infirmary on 10th October and was only released at 8 a.m. on the morning of the murder. He formally retracted his confession, before Thames magistrates, and Mr. Mead dismissed him. Meanwhile, 18-year-old fishmonger of Old Church Road, Stepney, Robert Dray, came forward. He knew a man called Conrad Donovan, aged 34, whose real name was Joseph Potter, as he lived almost directly opposite the shop where Ray worked. He told police he'd not seen Donovan for some time, but that morning he'd finished a night shift and headed to Gosling's coffee shop on Commercial Road, then had walked up to Miss Farmer's newsagent's. He arrived around 6:30 a.m. He saw a man, whom he'd seen with Donovan before, come out of the apparently closed shop, carrying a newspaper, and was followed by Donovan, who also carried a paper. This man turned out to be 22-year-old Charles Wade, Donovan's half-brother. Ray found it strange as he seemed to be in a hurry and left the door open. What made him even more curious was that there was no light on in the premises. Ray then saw the shop boy, Wiggins, take off the shutters. Ray didn't report his suspicions to police, although he did mention it to acquaintances, as he feared he would be attacked by Donovan or his cronies, so he just went home to bed after his night shift. At 10 a.m. he woke up, and his mother, with whom he lived, told him there had been a murder at the newsagent's on Commercial Road. Ray told her what he'd seen, and the following day his statement was taken by Detective Inspector Divil and Sergeant Wensley, who visited him at home. Both Donovan and Wade were traced, then arrested on 16th October. Ray was called into the Arbour Square police office, where he identified both men during a lineup. Donovan, a sailor who gave his address as Church Road in Limehouse, and Wade, a labourer living at Grosvenor Street, Ratcliffe, were both held on remand and charged on Tuesday 25th October with the murder of Miss Farmer. Their trial took place at the Central Criminal Court in London, better known as the Old Bailey, on 18th November 1904. They appeared before Mr. Justice Grantham, with the prosecution case being led by Charles Matthew and Arthur Gill. Percival Hughes, Paul Methven, and Gathorne Harvey acted on behalf of the accused pair. Another witness in the case was 26-year-old Richard Barnes. He was a painter to trade and had seen Wade with another man crossing Commercial Road the morning of the crime and heading towards the newsagents. He too had identified the pair during a lineup. He told the court he'd seen Wade the night before the murder between 10 and 11 p.m. with another man, Donovan, about 6 yards from Miss Farmer's shop. He'd also seen the men cross the road on the morning of the murder as he went to a coffee shop on Commercial Road. About 45 minutes later, he left, going home briefly, then went to the Friends Institute on Dorset Street, where he was working. Just before 8 a.m, he'd passed the shop and saw a police officer going inside, while a large group of people gathered outside it. He then heard of the murder. He told the court he hadn't come forward sooner, for fear of reprisals, just like Ray. His mother had also asked him to say nothing, as his father had been beaten up a few years beforehand. Both the prosecution and defence summed up their cases, followed by the judge, Sir William Grantham, who asked the jury to consider the evidence. They retired, and after just 10 minutes, they returned with their verdicts. Both men were found guilty of the murder of Miss Farmer. Justice Grantham donned the black cap. He expressed his sadness for Wade, who he believed had been led astray by Donovan, but concluded, It was a fortunate thing for society that the persons had been caught and were going to meet the doom for the crime of which they'd been convicted, and which was committed for the sake of gain. Both men were sentenced to be hanged. Just over a week before they were due for their sentence to be carried out, Miss Farmer's jewellery was discovered under floorboards, thanks to workmen who were repairing the property. This made no difference to the two men. They were hanged on Tuesday 13th December 1904 by executioner William Billingham, assisted by Henry Pierpoint. Only Donovan said anything before he was hanged. He told the prison chaplain, "No murder was intended."